Good afternoon, I'm James Ezimoha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. NATO leaders backed a significant increase in defense spending during the summit in The Hague. U.S. President Donald Trump says U.S. to hold nuclear talks with Iran next week. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signs a deal with the Council of Europe to set up a tribunal for crimes against Ukraine. NATO leaders have agreed to significantly increase defense spending following strong demands from U.S. President Donald Trump at a summit in The Hague. The alliance reaffirmed its commitment to collective defense under Article 5.
At the NATO summit in The Hague, leaders from all 32 member states endorsed a major hike in defense spending, a move strongly pushed by US President Donald Trump. The alliance approved a new target of 5% of GDP, including 3.5% for core defense capabilities and 1.5% for broader security infrastructure. The new targets mark a significant increase from the previous 2% goal and will be phased in over the next decade. In a 5-point declaration, NATO formally backed the elevated spending objective, a move aimed at satisfying US calls for greater burden sharing, while also addressing European concerns over mounting security threats from Russia in the aftermath of its 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
The countries have to find the money. It's not easy. These are political decisions. I totally recognize that. But at the same time, there is absolute conviction with my colleagues at the table that given the threat from the Russians, given the international security situation, there is no alternative. We've got to do this.
However, the Kremlin has criticized the summit, accusing NATO of militarization and portraying Russia as a threat to justify the increased spending. President Trump declared the outcome a great victory and expressed hope that increased spending would benefit U.S. arms manufacturers.
This is a monument really to victory, but it's a monumental win for the United States because we were carrying much more than our fair share. It was quite unfair, actually. But this is a big win for Europe and for actually Western civilization.
However, Trump also threatened to impose harsher trade terms on Spain after its prime minister said Madrid could meet its NATO obligations without hitting the 5% mark. French President Emmanuel Macron raised concerns over proposed US trade tariffs, warning they could undermine allied cooperation. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte praised Trump's role, calling the alliance now stronger, fairer, and more lethal. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met Trump privately after attending the summit's pre-dinner, but was not part of the main session. Despite underlying tensions, leaders reaffirmed their unity under Article 5, declaring that an attack on one is an attack on all.
The next NATO summit is scheduled to take place in Turkey in 2026, and now there are more details about a plan aimed at increasing NATO countries' defense spending to 5% of their GDP, up from the current 2%. However, the new target will be measured differently.
NATO leaders have been presented with a new defense spending target at a summit in The Hague, as demanded by US President Donald Trump. The plan suggests that NATO members should spend 5% of their GDP on defence and broader security investments. This is a significant increase from the current 2% goal, which was set at a summit in Wales in 2014. However, the new target will be measured differently. Members will be expected to spend 3.5% of GDP on core defence, troops and equipment, which matches the old 2% criteria. An additional 1.5% of GDP would go toward defence-related areas, such as adapting roads, bridges, and ports for military use, cybersecurity, and protecting energy pipelines. In 2024, NATO countries spent over $1.3 trillion on core defence, up from about $1 trillion a decade earlier in constant 2021 prices. But if they had all spent 3.5% of GDP last year, total spending would have reached around $1.75 trillion. The proposed increase is driven by Moscow's ongoing war in Ukraine and concerns about future threats from Russia. Pressure has also come from Washington to boost spending, especially as Europe faces the possibility that the US could withdraw some troops and capabilities. Still, not every NATO member is on board. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says his country can meet its military goals with spending at 2.1% of GDP. Spain approved the draft summit statement containing the new target, but made clear it will not spend that much. NATO officials say there will be no opt-out. Spain's spending will be tracked and, if it falls short, must rise. Britain, for its part, says it will overhaul its defence strategy to counter Russian threats, nuclear risks and cyber attacks by investing in drones and digital warfare rather than relying on a larger army. Responding to Trump's call for Europe to take greater responsibility for its security, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has pledged the largest sustained increase in British defence spending since the end of the Cold War. Compared to Russia, NATO countries spend a smaller share of GDP on defence, but collectively they vastly outspend Moscow. Russia raised its military spending by 38% in 2024, reaching about $149 billion, or 7.1% of its GDP, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. China, the world's second largest military spender, dedicated an estimated 1.7% of its GDP to defence last year. NATO members will be expected to meet the new target by 2035, though it could be reviewed and adjusted in 2029.
Poland's parliament has voted in favor of withdrawing from the Ottawa Convention, an international treaty banning the use of anti-personnel mines. The decision follows similar moves by Lithuania and Finland, raising concerns about the future of the convention.
Poland is moving to withdraw from a key international treaty banning anti-personnel landmines. In a vote held in the Sejm, the lower house of parliament, 413 deputies supported the government-backed bill, with just 15 opposing and 3 abstaining. The decision brings Poland closer to exiting the Ottawa Convention, officially known as the Convention on the Prohibition of the Use, Stockpiling, Production and Transfer of Anti-Personnel Mines. The legislation now heads to the Senate and then to President Andrzej Duda for final approval. Poland's defence minister said the move is needed for security, stressing the country cannot be bound by rules limiting its defence. Other countries in the region have already taken similar steps. Lithuania voted to leave the treaty in May, followed by Finland in June. Estonia and Latvia have signalled plans to withdraw as well. Adopted in 1997 and ratified by over 160 countries, the Ottawa Convention was seen as a landmark step in protecting civilians from landmines. The regional shift is raising doubts about the Ottawa Convention's future. With several countries withdrawing, serious questions loom over its effectiveness as a global ban on anti-personnel mines.
European Union leaders are holding a 2-day summit in Brussels with a heavy focus on global conflict, geoeconomic pressures and trade tensions with the United States.
EU leaders have opened a 2-day summit in Brussels to address mounting global and economic pressures, including the war in Ukraine, conflict in the Middle East, and trade tensions with Washington. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to join via video as the bloc debates a new round of sanctions against Russia and how to manage the war's energy impact. Baltic leaders renewed calls for Ukraine's accession to the EU, with Lithuania and Estonia urging faster political progress.
As Latvia, as Baltic states, we are very committed to further sanctions against Russia and as well Belarus, because for us it's very important to keep Russia out of financial resources. And sanctions is a very effective way, as well as shadow fleet.
Another major item on the agenda is how to respond to US President Donald Trump's July 9th deadline for a new trade deal. Most EU leaders favour a quick agreement, even if it benefits Washington, to avoid prolonged tariff disputes.
I support the EU Commission in all its efforts to reach a trade agreement with the United States quickly. I want us to get Mercosur off the ground and conclude further trade agreements. Europe is facing decisive weeks and months. This European Union has the support of the federal government of the Federal Republic of Germany. And I would like to make my personal contribution back in Brussels after many, many years to ensure that Europe enters the next few years successfully.
The problem is that on behalf of the United States, we have a heavyweight filmmaker. On our side, European Union, we have a light capacity and capability leaders to negotiate. So the problem is that the American negotiator is very strong. Our negotiators are rather weak. That's the problem.
The talks follow a NATO summit where members pledged to raise defence spending to 5% of GDP. Spain's refusal to do so drew threats from Trump to double tariffs on Spanish exports, a move that could impact the entire EU. The summit is also expected to address the worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza, regional instability, and efforts to revive nuclear talks with Iran. Migration and internal security remain on the agenda as well.
U.S. President Donald Trump stated on Wednesday that he is likely to seek a commitment from Iran to halt its nuclear program during next week's talks. Trump, who helped negotiate the ceasefire, told reporters at the NATO summit that he was not particularly interested in restarting negotiations with Iran, insisting that U.S. strikes had destroyed its nuclear program. Iran has not acknowledged any talks taking place next week, despite reports from U.S. officials. French President Emmanuel Macron and the International Atomic Energy Agency Director Raphael Grossi met in Paris to discuss the status of Iran's nuclear program. The meeting focused on the radiological risks following the airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities and how the IAEA can respond. Steps to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons were also discussed. Iran has urged the United Nations to formally condemn what it describes as the unlawful use of force by the U.S. and Israel against its civilian nuclear facilities. Tehran says the sites were under international supervision and used solely for peaceful purposes. Turaj Shiralilu has more from Tehran.
Iran's diplomatic mission at the United Nations has urged the world body to refute the Israel-U.S. claim of the preemptive legitimate self-defense and to condemn their use of force against Iran's nuclear sites under monitoring of the International Atomic Energy Agency. In a letter to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and Guyana, as the current chair state of the Security Council, Iran's envoy, Amir Saeed Iravani, said the pretext cited by Washington and Tel Aviv to resort to an act of aggression against a sovereign state lacks legal basis. According to the IRNA news agency, he said the justification to attack the civilian nuclear sites, which are monitored by the UN watchdog, was based on a willful and distorted interpretation of Article 51 of the UN Charter. Iravani urged the Security Council to condemn in strongest terms the use of force by Israel and the US on Iran's nuclear sites, which are under the IAEA verification and are used for peaceful purposes. The letter was sent a day after a ceasefire, which is holding since Tuesday between Iran on one side and the US and Israel on the other side. Iran's parliament on Wednesday voted for suspension of cooperation with the UN nuclear agency due to its failure in condemning the U.S. Israeli attacks. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump said on Wednesday that the Iranian and U.S. negotiators will meet next week to discuss a nuclear deal. Tehran has not yet commented on Trump's statement. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for A News TV, Tehran.
A new international tribunal has been set up to prosecute Russia's leadership for launching the war in Ukraine. It's the first court of its kind created by the Council of Europe's human rights body and will operate independently of existing legal institutions.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has signed an historic agreement with the Council of Europe human rights body to establish a special tribunal dedicated to prosecuting Russia for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. The signing ceremony took place in Strasbourg, where Zelensky was welcomed by Council Secretary-General Alain Berset. Officially backed by European foreign ministers in May, it will focus on senior Russian officials who orchestrated the 2022 full-scale invasion. The Ukrainian president said the move sends a powerful signal that aggressive wars will not go unpunished.
This is a really, truly very important step. Today we are launching the process to create a tribunal for Russia's crime of aggression against Ukraine. Every war criminal must know there will be justice, and that includes Russia. And we are now boosting the legal work in a serious way. There is still a long way to go. Politically, we have already made big progress, and I'm grateful to the Committee of Ministers, to the Council of Europe, and to everyone showing leadership.
Unlike the International Criminal Court, which lacks jurisdiction over crimes of aggression, this special court is designed to specifically target national leaders. This include acting or former presidents, prime ministers and foreign ministers who bear the highest responsibility for initiating war. This marks the first time the Council of Europe is establishing such a tribunal, which will operate independently from the European Court of Human Rights.
Ukraine and the Council of Europe are signing an agreement to establish the special tribunal for the crime of aggression. A tribunal to judge between victims and aggressors, between impunity and accountability. Because without accountability, there can be no lasting peace for Ukraine and Europe as a whole.
The International Criminal Court in Hague has already issued war crimes warrants for Russian President Vladimir Putin for unlawful deportation and transfer of children during the Russia-Ukraine war. However, this new court will address the core act of launching the war itself. A dedicated registry has already documented more than 34,000 instances of war-related harm, including civilian deaths, torture, sexual violence and destruction, which may serve as evidence in future prosecutions.
The United States has signed a global entry deal with Costa Rica, allowing travelers a streamlined approach when moving between the two countries.
U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem has signed a global entry deal with Costa Rica. The global entry program falls under U.S. Customs and Border Protection and is designed to expedite clearance for pre-approved or low-risk travelers to the United States. Noem met with Costa Rican President Rodrigo Chavez and says the deal will benefit both countries.
Just a few minutes ago, signed an agreement on global entry. As you know, your economy relies a lot on hospitality and hosting individuals. Many Americans come down here to relax, to enjoy. And I hope that the next time that I come, I get the chance to bring my family and to do that with you. But this is my first trip to Costa Rica, and so I have not had the ability to come here before. But global entry will allow travelers a much more streamlined approach to coming back and forth between Costa Rica and the United States of America. And today we signed an agreement to move forward with that.
A security agreement was also signed where Costa Rica will screen all goods entering the country through its airports and seaports to curb the flow of drugs headed towards the United States.
Thanks to the United States and the personal commitment of Madam Secretary, we have a specific plan for Costa Rica to become the only and first country in the world that will scan all products and goods entering through our seaports and airports.
This marks the second stop during Noem's tour of Central America. She later met with Honduras President Xiomara Castro on Wednesday.
The U.S. President Donald Trump recently stated that we shouldn't expect developments and surprising news regarding Abraham Accords that new countries are set to join. Joining us to discuss this is Hamdi Rifai, political analyst from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you.
Now, could Syria realistically consider joining the Abraham Accords, or does such a move clash with its long-standing alliances and political stance?
Well, Syria doesn't have any long-standing alliances or political stances. We have a new government in place, a government that has clearly made no expectations known to Israel. We must put this into the proper context, though. There's a one-sided battle going on, an asymmetrical war. Israel has decided to launch a war to then talk about peace. And peace is very difficult when one side is occupying the other side's country, and that's what Israel's done. In response to a new government with a whole new page turned here, we see that Israel has skipped the diplomacy time and went straight to war, attacking Syria, killing Syrians, bombing Syrians, creating military outposts in Syria. So to talk about peace or joining the Abraham Accords while Israel continues to engage in this kind of belligerent activity in Syria is really very difficult to understand. We have one side that wants peace, Syria. The new government has clearly said that they have no intentions of any kind of antagonism or foreign interference in Israel, yet Israel has chosen to engage in a pattern now of foreign interference over the last 7 months, where it's supporting sectarian elements, separatists, people who are making sectarian claims based purely on a power grab.
Now, Syria has remained silent in response to recent Israeli strikes on Iranian targets within its territory. Now, what might be the strategic reason behind this?
Well, clearly Syria as a nation and the new Syrian government has no greater enemy than Iran. So when we see Syria silent in response to attacks on Iran, nobody should be surprised. Iran is the one that brought Russia into Syria, that caused the killing of maybe as many as 1 million Syrians by Iran, Russia, and Assad during the past 14 years. So clearly no Syrian is going to shed a tear over anything that might happen to the Iranian regime.
Now, finally, if Syria does engage in normalization efforts, how might that impact its relationships with regional partners?
Well, there's nothing that should be surprising about normalization with Israel. Israel has now existed for approximately 100 years, 75 to 100 years at this point. So, Israel has been in existence for a long time now. Acceptance of the existence of a nation should not be shocking to anyone. And a state of constant war was never the intention of any Syrian. That was maybe a stated goal of resistance of the prior Syrian government, but that prior Syrian government had no credibility, authority, etc. It was a government, an outcast government, a rogue government that was part of the axis of resistance of Iran that has now been destroyed.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
For the first time since last month's border flare-up, the defense ministers of India and Pakistan came face-to-face at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in China. India's Rajnath Singh and Pakistan's Khawaja Asif were seen touring the same meeting hall during the summit, alongside other regional leaders. Since the May military flare-up between India and Pakistan in the disputed Kashmir region, relations between the two nuclear-armed neighbors have remained tense. At least 6 people are dead after massive floods swept through southwestern China. Towns and villages along the Liu River are half submerged, and a tropical cyclone is expected to make landfall later today, adding to the disaster risk. Cleanup is underway, but emergency services remain on high alert for landslides, road collapses, and dam overflows. Experts warn the climate change is fueling more extreme weather, threatening millions and straining China's aging flood defenses. At least 2 people were killed in France on Wednesday evening following heavy rainfalls in Paris, according to officials. Strong gusty winds and hail, described as the size of tangerines, damaged cars and buildings. The storm also resulted in the suspension of the French Parliament session as rain leaked into the chamber. It followed a heat wave with temperatures of more than 40 degrees in some of the areas in the country. For the 3rd consecutive day, New York City faces an extreme heat warning, prompting officials to evacuate emergency plans as residents seek relief from sweltering temperatures. The city continues to cope with widespread impacts as the intense heat wave persists.
New York City remains under an extreme heat warning, with real field temperatures exceeding 37 degrees Celsius for a third consecutive day. In response, the city has activated its heat emergency plan for the first time this year, while Governor Kathy Hochul has declared a state of emergency across 32 counties. Thousands of residents are seeking relief in cooling centres and public pools, while others have headed to nearby beaches.
Well, it was really hot, and yeah, we were just home, so I thought maybe the beach would be the best place because it's too hot to go to the bar.
I used to worship the heat back in the day, years ago, when I would tan for the beach and just lay out there and absorb the sun. But right now, I take care of my skin because it's very damaging, and it's just extremely too hot, and the heat seems to be worse from when I was growing up. It's a lot hotter, and it seems like it's dry, and it's just too intense.
The heat wave has already caused disruptions, with more than 6,000 customers in Queens left without power on Monday. Prolonged and extreme heat events such as this are becoming more frequent, widely attributed to the ongoing effects of climate change. However, rain and cooler weather are expected in New York City on Thursday.
Armenia may soon hold new discussions with Azerbaijan. That's according to Deputy Foreign Minister Vahan Kostanian on Thursday. Kostanian expressed a positive stance toward dialogue, noting Armenia's readiness to sign a peace treaty and support for further meetings with Azerbaijan. He cited the recent leaders' meeting in Tirana as a promising move towards renewed discussions. Armenian security forces have raided homes targeting opposition supporters following claims of a Ford coup attempt. Police reportedly searched properties linked to the Armenian Pan-National Unity Party, founded by fugitive ex-official Migrant Poghosyan. Local opposition figure Sevak Kavchanian said several residents were taken in for questioning. The investigative committee said it had disrupted an unconstitutional plot to seize power. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan blamed criminal oligarchic and clerical circles for what he called a massive and despicable attempt to destabilize the country. And now we're joined live from Moscow by Dmitry Babich, political analyst and columnist in Russian press since 1990. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, good evening.
Armenia has arrested Archbishop Bagrat, a well-known opposition leader, accusing him of plotting a coup against Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. Authorities say he and others planned a government coup. What's the political background behind this conflict between the government and the church?
Well, it's clear that Bagrat Galstanyan was a prominent opposition figure who obviously disliked the policies of Mr. Pashinyan and his pro-Western orientation. And this is very unfortunate that people who speak in the name of the West in Caucasus, people like Pashinyan, and before him Mikhail Saakashvili, and before him people like Gamsakhutia and Shevardnadze, they all breach human rights. They all strangle free speech, saying that they do it in the name of protecting democracy. And they all oppose Christian organizations and traditional churches in their countries. So this is just one more example when a pro-Western authoritarian government goes against the church and goes against the opposition.
Now, what evidence supports the government's coup allegations?
Well, we don't know that because we are not in Armenia, and in general, the power structure in Armenia is very non-transparent. The Russian government said it was an internal matter for Armenia, so I'm not going to speak for my government here. But for me, it's obvious that, when bishops are being arrested, when the church is being declared a foreign agent, liaised with foreign powers, this is not good. Nothing like that happens in Azerbaijan. Even though Azerbaijan is a Muslim country, Christian churches, including the Russian Orthodox Church, are respected there. And you can't imagine a church leader being arrested. Unfortunately, that happens in Armenia. Unfortunately, that happened very often in Georgia. Unfortunately, it's going on all the time in Ukraine, where the traditional Ukrainian Orthodox Church was declared a Russian agent by the government. So these are all very unfortunate events, and I think the international community should pay attention to it. Instead, the international community criticizes only the government of Azerbaijan, the government of Russia, the government of Belarus. And when pro-Western governments go against Christians, when they go against opposition organizations, this is all considered to be normal. This is all what they call protection of democracy.
Now, finally and briefly, could these events affect Armenia's future elections or relations with neighboring countries?
Well, I would not express too many expectations about free elections in Armenia. Mr. Pashinyan came to power via a violent coup in 2015, and he is not going to leave power simply because some people vote against him. He goes against traditional values of Armenian society. He sucks up to the West. That will not be like many people in Armenia. But will their voice be heard? We know from experience that in Armenia, if someone comes to power, that person doesn't leave it in a democratic way. That person or that group just clings to power. This has been the destiny of Armenia since 1991, since it became an independent country.
Thank you very much for your time and insight.
Thank you.
Iran has reopened its eastern airspace and resumed operations at multiple airports following a 12-day closure during the conflict with Israel. According to Majid Afghan, spokesperson for the Ministry of Roads and Urban Development, the skies are now open for domestic, international and transit flights. In what's been described as a historic milestone, Uzbekistan's president has made his first official visit to Mongolia. The two countries signed 7 agreements and pledged to boost trade. They also launched a new transport corridor through Kyrgyzstan and China.
According to the press service of the Uzbek president, this first official visit to Mongolia was described as a historic milestone in strengthening friendship and expanding cooperation between the two nations. At the heart of the talks was economic partnership. A trade house featuring a permanent showroom of Uzbek products has already opened in Ulaanbaatar, a real and walking platform for building stronger business ties on the ground. The two leaders also agreed on practical areas of industrial collaboration, where their economies naturally complement one another. These include joint projects in mining and mineral processing, agriculture and livestock development. In total, 7 agreements were signed. The presidents also agreed to increase bilateral trade by up to 20 times. In 2024, trade turnover reached $20.4 million. Another key decision was launching direct flights between Tashkent and Ulaanbaatar this fall. And as landlocked countries, Uzbekistan and Mongolia share a common interest in building reliable trade corridors. The two sides agreed to develop these routes jointly with the support of expert teams. And ahead of the visit, Uzbekistan launched a brand new international transport corridor to Mongolia through Kyrgyzstan and China. The first delivery made it to its destination in just 8 days after a 45-kilometer journey by road. The route presents some geographic challenges as parts of it pass through the Altai Mountains, reaching elevations of up to 1,500 meters above sea level. But despite the challenges, this alternative corridor could play a key role in regional logistics, cutting both delivery times and costs for Uzbek businesses looking to reach the Mongolian and North Chinese markets. Fariza Kalimurzina, A News, in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
Well, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.